consultora estratégica, coach ejecutivo, autora de varios libros y speaker internacional, llamada por el New York Times como una experta en reinventarse a sí misma y ayudar a otros a hacer cambios en sus vidas. Demos la bienvenida a Dorie Clark.
Hola y qué tal? Let's face it, it's not hard these days to be a short-term thinker. In fact, part of it's human nature. If I were to offer you a good thing today, or a good thing sometime in the hazy, indeterminate future, you're probably going to want the good thing now. Part of it is social media. When you see other people constantly, images surrounding you of other people enjoying good things, enjoying the good life, we want that now. Partly that's short-term thinking. And part of it is the lessons that the pandemic has taught us over the past 3 years. Short-term thinking was rewarded again and again because the truth is, we might have made long-term plans, and they kept getting canceled and changed because circumstances adjusted and we had to move quickly. We had to pivot, we had to adapt, we had to adjust. That's how we kept ourselves safe. Yay for short-term thinking. Short-term thinking can be a great thing in our lives, but there's a danger when it becomes the only thing we know how to do, the only thing that we know how to do. At the beginning of the pandemic, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and he said something that I thought was kind of interesting and kind of profound. He said that if you have a group of smart, committed, intelligent people perhaps a lot like yourselves, the worst thing that you can do is to tell them to win at the wrong thing, because they'll do it. There is nothing worse, there's nothing sadder than a situation where you have been working so hard, so tirelessly to accomplish something, only at the end to discover that it was the wrong thing. That's the danger of short-term thinking. Because if we find ourselves in a rut, if we find ourselves in mental habits that we can't break out of, that we forget there are other options, then it becomes very easy for us to just keep doing the same thing without questioning it. And that's how sometimes we can end up winning at the wrong things. Over the past few years, I have become an evangelist for long-term strategic thinking, because I think that's the way out of it, is forcing ourselves to lift up our perspectives and ask the important questions. What should we be doing? Are we spending our time in the right ways? Are we actually working toward the goals that we say matter most to us? And the truth is, a lot of people agree with me, at least on paper. There was a study a number of years ago of 10,000 senior leaders. And they asked them, what is the single most important thing you can do for the success of your business? And 97% of them agreed on that thing. I mean, when was the last time 97% of people agreed on anything? But 97% agreed that the most important thing they could do for the success of their business was long-term strategic thinking. That's incredibly powerful. You would think this is something that everyone is using, that everyone is doing all the time, right? We all know it's a good idea. And yet, a study right around the same time was done, and 96% of leaders said they don't have time for strategic thinking. They're too busy. They're pulled in too many directions. That is bad for society, I'll be honest. And that's why I've actually written a book to try to help spread the message. But it's also something that is an opportunity for you. Because if you are one of the few people that doesn't just talk about how strategic thinking, long-term thinking is good, but you actually do it, you actually take the time and make the effort to lift yourself out of the day-to-day and ask bigger questions, it is an enormously powerful competitive advantage for you. So today, I wanted to share with you 5 ways, 5 strategies that all of us can use so that we can become better long-term thinkers, so that we can flex that muscle and perhaps wake it up again. Because for a lot of us, it became dormant during the pandemic. But now is the time to put our stake in the ground and start to do things differently. The first may sound a little counterintuitive, and it's deciding what to be bad at. And why would you do that, right? Nobody wants to be bad at anything. But here's the thing. We need to choose. About a decade ago, there was a book written by some colleagues of mine, Frances Fry, who's a Harvard Business School professor, and her partner, Ann Morris. It was called Uncommon Service. And it was a book looking at the service industry, and specifically at the question of why it is that so many businesses, when, of course, everyone wants to be great, everybody aspires to be the best, but they wanted to look at the question of why is it that, despite that intention, so many businesses are so profoundly meh. They're so profoundly average. And what they discovered, I thought was incredibly powerful. It's not that the businesses don't have high aspirations. Everyone does. They say, well, we're going to be great at this, we're going to be great at that. But what they discovered is that no one was willing to pay the price necessary to be great. Because we heard just a couple of nights ago from James Cameron, hope is not a strategy. What so many of these businesses did was engage in hope. They said, we're going to be great at this right here. We're going to be the most cost effective, or we're going to be the most luxurious, or we're going to be the most whatever it is. But in their minds, they said, we're going to be great at this thing, and we'll be perfectly good. We'll be perfectly fine at everything else. What Ann Morris and Frances Fry discovered is that's not how it works. We live in a world with constrained resources. You actually can't be great at something and be perfectly good at everything else. If you are ever going to rise above, if you are ever truly going to be great at something, you need to choose what to be bad at. If you're Southwest Airlines, you are great at having affordable airlines, affordable tickets for passengers, but they made a choice. They said, we are going to ignore the business class passengers. That's not what we do. They profiled a bank in their book. This bank had very late hours. They stayed open until 8 o'clock at night. The customers loved it, of course. Why wouldn't you? But there's a reason most banks don't do it. It costs money. So how this bank paid for it is they gave you very, very little money on your deposits. The interest rates that they paid were terrible. Now, that was a strategic choice. Not everybody would like that. But for their customers, they loved it because it meant that the bank would be open late. If you're ever going to aspire to greatness, and this is true not just for companies, this is true for our own lives, what are you going to be bad at? It may mean that we accept that the house is not going to be perfectly clean. It may mean that you accept that the emails in your inbox are going to take quite a while to be replied to. But what that frees you up to do is to do your most important work. We have to choose what to be bad at. Number 2, balance your portfolio. Now, if you know anything about investing, Literally the one thing, if you know one piece of advice about investing, what people always say is don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? Don't invest all your money in one thing. You need to diversify a little bit. That's how you stay safe. And yet, so often in our careers, in our professional lives, in our lives overall, we fail to do that. We just do our job, we keep doing our job, and then if something happens, if something changes, it can be at risk. I know this personally. I was laid off from my very first job. Then I went from having what I thought was a secure job to having no job at all. One of the best things that we can do as strategic thinkers is to always ask ourselves, what's around the corner? What's coming? And how can we prepare for it? It is important for all of us in our careers, in our lives, to have cash, the equivalent of the very, very safe thing, but also the moonshot. What is the small percentage of our portfolio? And I don't just mean money, I mean time, I mean energy, I mean effort, that is speculative, that may or may not pay off, but if it does pay off, it could be incredibly powerful. This is why Google famously has 20% time for their employees, where they encourage their employees to spend up to 20% of their time on discretionary activities. This is how Gmail was invented. This is how Google News was invented. Now, the truth is, even at Google, very few of their employees actually take advantage of 20% time. They're too busy. They're too busy doing their regular jobs, so they don't bother. But we need to make that effort. It could be something as simple as picking a topic, let's say artificial intelligence, and saying, you know what, it's important for me to learn more about this. So maybe instead of listening to music at the gym, you listen to audiobooks. And over the course of a year, you read or you listen to half a dozen audiobooks about artificial intelligence. By the end of the year, you are going to know more than most people you know. Are you going to know more than an artificial intelligence expert? No, of course not. But you're going to know a lot more than most people. And that kind of future-oriented, speculative planning helps you stay at the forefront. It helps keep you aware of trends and developments and possibilities. And whatever your topic is, it could be AI, it could be learning about jazz music, it could be learning how to invest time in becoming a better speaker. Whatever it is, it's your choice, but it's the investment that you make in the future you. Number 3, we've been talking over the past couple of days about the power of ideas, the power of innovation. That is incredibly important. But of course, any innovation comes with a risk of failure, right? I mean, that's almost necessary, because if you're legitimately trying something new, you have no idea. It could work, it might not work. We don't know at the outset, but that's part of the bargain. It may feel risky, of course, and that's why not everyone does it. But one of the most important elements that I think we all need to realize when it comes to failure and the risks that real or perceived that come with it is that there are things we can do, there are ways we can limit our risks. In Silicon Valley, famously, they have what they call the lean startup methodology. In lean startup, what they're trying to do is create a new product or a new service so quickly that they can test the premise to see if it works without spending the money to perfect it. Because it doesn't really make a lot of sense to perfect something if no one wants it in the first place. The way that I like to think about it is that if you were to go to a casino and lose $1 million, that would be a catastrophe. That would be terrible for almost every single one of us. But if you were to go to a casino and lose $1, no one is going to even notice. No one's going to notice that 100 pesos that you lost. Whatever. How can we make 100 peso bets and not 1 million peso bets? That's the question. How can we test and try more things in small ways? You want to change your career? Amazing. Don't just quit your job and think that you'll find something else. Do informational interviews. See what you can learn. Read biographies and autobiographies of people who are in that field. Have lunches, go to conferences, have networking events. Learn what you can in small ways so that you are removing as much risk as possible. That way, if the 100 peso bet doesn't work out, no one cares, no one will notice. You move on to the next one. Failure does have to happen in innovation. It's necessary, but it never has to be fatal. Number 4, there are a couple of authors that I really admire, Stephen Kotler and Peter Diamandis. They've teamed up on a number of books together. One's called Bold, one's called Abundance. And one of the things that they like to talk about is what they call exponential technology. Specifically, this is the kind of technology that grows at an exponential rate. This could be things like self-driving cars, 3D printing. It could be artificial intelligence. Even back in the day, it would be things like digital photography, right? So it's growing exponentially, these very important technological breakthroughs. They wrote about the pattern of progression of these exponential technologies. And one of the things they identified, which captivated me, honestly, was what they call the deception phase. Because it turns out, as you can imagine, right? We don't go overnight from an idea to a finished product. There's a lot of steps in between. And in one of the steps, the deception phase, this is where, indeed, the technology really is continuing to grow. It's continuing to gather momentum. It's growing at an exponential rate. But the problem is, when things start at zero, even if they're growing exponentially, in the beginning, you can't really tell. If you have a pond and it's filled with lily pads, right? These little things here that frogs jump on. You start with one lily pad, and the next day it's 2 lily pads. It's growing exponentially. But somebody looking at it from the outside says, yeah, so what? That still looks like an empty pond to me. You go from 2 to 4 lily pads. Oh, still exponential growth. All the people around you, not impressed. Does not look like a lot of lily pads. But on the 29th day, half the pond is full, and on day 30, the entire pond is full. Overnight, there is a dramatic change. Everyone can see it then. But in those early days, it is so easy for all of us, even if you know you're making progress, to feel discouraged when other people can't see that progress, when other people don't recognize it, when they look at it and say, well, that's dumb, or they look at it and say, doesn't seem like you're getting anywhere. That happens not just, my friends, in exponential technology. It happens in almost any project that we do. I'm sure you've had experiences where you've been working on something that's important to you. You know that this project is going to make a difference, and other people keep whispering to you, doesn't look like it's going anywhere. Shouldn't you give up on that? Sometimes those voices are even inside our own heads. But it is incredibly important for us to recognize the existence of the deception phase, that even if things are moving just as they should be, we can be deceived and others can be deceived. And that is the moment when we are vulnerable to quitting. That's when we're vulnerable to giving up and stopping too early on projects that could truly make a transformative difference. If we want to be long-term thinkers, we have to be very mindful of that. And I promised you 5. The last strategy that I wanted to share goes hand in glove with the deception phase. It's what I like to call watching for the raindrops. Because the question that comes up, of course, all the time is, well, how do I know? How do I know if my project, my idea isn't working, or if it just isn't working yet? How do I know when I should give up or when I should persist? That is a very hard question in the moment, because it often feels like we're in the middle of a dark tunnel. We're going through this tunnel, and we don't know how long it is. It could be a mile, it could be 100 miles. We don't know. How do you have faith? Watching for the raindrops is basically the idea that there are small telltale signs that you are moving in the right direction, that you are making progress. But they are small enough that most people wouldn't even notice them. Most people would just keep on moving and you don't see them. But it is essential that we train ourselves to look for them, because that is what can keep us motivated even when things feel slow and it feels like you're not making progress. If there is a thunderstorm that happens, it almost never is the case that it comes out of nowhere, right? For hours before, the clouds are rolling in, you can see the sky change, you can feel the air pressure change, you can see it darken, you even start to feel a few tiny raindrops. And that's how you know the thunderstorm is coming. And similarly, for your project, for the thing that you care about, we need to identify those metrics that show that people care. Maybe it means that you're suddenly getting more people asking you about your project. Maybe you're getting more LinkedIn invitations. Maybe all of a sudden there seems to be people outside having conversations, talking about it, because you are starting a movement. It may be subtle signs, but look for them because it shows you that you are on the right track. When you are truly a long-term thinker, it is hard to stay motivated and to persist when things feel like they're not going anywhere. But it is essential that you do it, because that is how we can achieve our most important goals for our lives, for our careers, and for the world. Thank you.